In the year 313 AD, through the Edict of Milan, Christianity was recognized for the first time as a state religion. In the year 324, Constantine the Great became the sole emperor of the Roman Empire. 6 years later, he transferred the capital from Rome to Byzantium, a Greek city founded in the 8th century BC. Byzantium was renamed Constantinople, and for 1,000 years it stood as the defender of Christendom at the gates of Europe, and it was to become the greatest creative center of medieval times. This was the first Christian state, and its vast domain became known as the Byzantine Empire. Cyprus exists a wealth of Byzantine religious paintings which can provide us with priceless information regarding the whole period of Byzantine supremacy. In the many little churches and monasteries that are scattered on the island, one can find frescoes and wall paintings that represent every age and every tradition of Byzantine painting, from the 6th century up until the 16th, when Cyprus was occupied by the Ottoman Turks and Christian art began to die. It is estimated that only 1% of what once existed has survived, but even this tiny percentage provides us with a wealth of Byzantine art that no other area of such small size can provide.
Μετά την επικράτηση εντελώς του χριστιανισμού, η οποία πρέπει να θεωρηθεί ότι έγινε τον 4ο αιώνα, βεβαίως από την αρχή να άρχισε να επικρατεί.
After the establishment of Christianity in the 4th century, when Constantine the Great moved to Byzantium and the Roman Empire became Christian, iconography began to appear, in the beginning in an uncertain manner. Then later it was established more widely, and it was accepted as part of the Christian worship after the 7th century.
In the beginning, Byzantine art adopted Hellenistic and Roman models, which were turned into two-dimensional iconic representations. Christianity needed symbols rather than images. There are many examples to demonstrate the borrowing of ideas from the classical Greco-Roman world by the early Christian artists. This 3rd century mosaic in Paphos shows Icarius, the first man to be taught by the god Dionysus how to make wine. It bears striking stylistic and iconographic similarities to later representations of St. Paul, seen here in a painting of the death of the Virgin Mary from the church of Panagia to Arakos. The birth of Achilles, a hero of the Trojan War, represented in this mosaic again in Paphos, is uncannily similar to many scenes of the birth of the Virgin as seen by the Byzantine artists. Art became Christian art, and religion, the state, and art mingled into one, so that the Byzantine artist could only capture the spirit of his work if himself felt part of this tripartite and inseparable existence. In the sanctuary of the Church of the Virgin built by angels at Kiti village outside Larnaca, we find the finest mosaic surviving in Cyprus today. It is a unique example of early Christian art. Such mosaics of the 6th century are very rare, examples perhaps surviving only in Cyprus and Ravenna in Italy. In this magnificent arrangement, the Virgin is attended by the archangels Michael and Gabriel. The whole composition acquires life and rhythm within a gold background.
In these churches, all phases of Byzantine art are presented, but especially the 6th century mosaics preserved in different churches of Cyprus are well known to all Byzantinists and throughout the world. Unfortunately, some of these mosaics have been destroyed recently by Turks because the churches are in the area of Cyprus occupied by the Turkish army.
The religious, historical, and artistic importance of these mosaics is demonstrated in the continuous interest shown on the subject by the international press. 9 years after their theft, the Kanakaria mosaics found their way to the United States, where they were put up for sale for the price of $20 million. Fortunately, after the intervention of the Church and government of Cyprus, the Indianapolis State Court ruled that the mosaics belonged to the Greek Orthodox Church of Cyprus and could not therefore be sold, but should be returned to the island. Just off the main road to Paphos, in the village of Geroskipou, stands one of the oldest Byzantine churches on the island. In addition to the fact that it may go back as far as the 7th or 8th century, what makes the church of St. Paraskevi so unique is the fact that in the sanctuary have survived decorations that are not iconic, but stylized, floral and geometric. Although the paintings are half destroyed, to the expert they are of unparalleled significance, because they most probably date from before 843 and belong to the iconoclastic period. This was a period in Byzantine history during the 8th and 9th centuries, when the emperors favored the argument that creating images in the churches was idolatrous. The result was that for over 100 years, and by imperial order, most of the existing art, whether in the form of icons, frescoes or mosaics, was destroyed. Because the discussion of whether creating images in Christianity can generate controversy even today, we ask His Beatitude the Archbishop of Cyprus Chrysostomos to explain the reason for the split among Christians in the 8th and 9th centuries, and why such paintings, whether created in the past or today, should not present a Christian with the fear of falling victim of an idolatrous practice. After all, the second commandment of the Old Testament clearly stated, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I the Lord thy God am a jealous God."
Ειδικά τον 8ο αιώνα υπήρχε η εικονομαχία. Γεννήθηκε η εικονομαχία και η εικονολατρεία, η εικονοφιλία.
Another reason for the total destruction of previous Christian art was the fact that Christians were divided into the iconodules and the iconoclasts. The iconodules supported the use of icons in their churches, while the iconoclasts wanted to destroy them. Especially during the 8th century, the Byzantine emperors shared the iconoclast views, and a great deal of icons were destroyed. At the same time, however, there was a reaction against the iconoclasts, and there was a new beginning in the painting of icons, particularly within the Orthodox Church. It was then that the ecclesiastical meaning of icons and how Christianity sees them was established. In Christianity, the icon does not represent an idol, which is what the ancients believed and the iconoclasts wanted to believe. The icon is simply an expression, a specific representation of a person to whom Christians pray and pay their respects. One could compare an icon to a photograph of a beloved person. We have in our homes the picture of our mother, our father, and so on, and we have certain respect for these pictures. We must consider icons in a similar manner within Christianity, as the photographs are beloved persons in our homes. And although Jesus teaches us that God is spirit, and the spirit we should worship, man does not cease from also being material. Therefore there is a need to express his feelings through special ways. This is why we have human ways of expressing our feelings to God. We wish to show our appreciation to God. So we light a candle. It is not the candle itself that carries the meaning of our action. We simply want to relate our inner feelings with human, material actions, because we are not only spirits, but also have material bodies.
Γι' αυτό και
But icons do not only hold this typical meaning. If we look carefully, we shall notice that the iconography of various figures is made in such a way so as to express a spiritual discipline, a saintly expression on the painted face. There are also certain metaphysical expressions within the icon's features.
The Byzantine Museum, next to the Archbishopric in Nicosia, houses one of the richest and most representative collections of Byzantine icons from the 8th to the 18th centuries. With the permission of the Archbishop and the director of the museum, we filmed some of the treasured icons that are on display and which were collected from all over Cyprus. Since 1974, hundreds of other equally priceless icons were looted from the north part of the island, which is occupied by the Turkish army, and were illegally sold abroad. This 14th century fresco was removed from the sanctuary of the Church of St. Nicholas of the Roof, which is situated near the famous resort village of Kakopetria. It was discovered by the Department of Antiquities that underneath this painting there was a similar 11th century fresco. The 14th century fresco was successfully removed and is now displayed here at the museum, while the original 11th century painting can now be admired in the Church of St. Nicholas, where restoration work is taking place. Painting over existing frescoes was a frequent exercise by the Byzantines. Because the original painting was becoming old, or because the local people wanted a new decoration, or perhaps in order to follow a new trend on the emphasis of the painting, they will commission a contemporary artist. A new layer of lime will be laid over the old fresco and the new painting will take place.
One of the most interesting churches in Cyprus with frescoes is the Church of Agios Antonios at Gelia near Larnaca. There, 3 layers of frescoes have been preserved. The earliest dated to the 9th century and the others in the 11th or 12th and 13th century. For preservation of the different layers of frescoes in that church, we have separated the different layers. So now we have the frescoes of different periods. We have left in the church the original fresco of the 9th century, and we have separated the fresco of the 11th century, which is here preserved, and then we have preserved also the 13th century fresco, which was over that of the 11th century. And here are those frescoes which have been separated and removed from the church for preservation. As you can see, we have frescoes of 11th, 13th century, and 12th century from different parts of the Church of Agios Antonios of Gelia.
With the defeat of the iconoclasts in the 9th century, the golden age of Byzantine art and civilization began. Under the Macedonian dynasty from the 8th to the 11th century, the Komnenian dynasty from the end of the 11th to the end of the 12th century, and finally the Paleologan dynasty, which was to last until 1453, when Constantinople fell in the hands of the Ottomans and the Byzantine Empire was dissolved. During these centuries, ecclesiastical art became the universal art of the aristocracy, as well as of the masses. There are no strict schools of painting in Byzantine art, as we know them in the West. Some experts, however, divide the painting into the neoclassical or aristocratic school and the monastic or popular school. The Church of St. Nicholas of the Roof is one of the most important surviving Byzantine painted churches on the island. It was built probably in the early 11th century, and it belonged to a monastic establishment until the 19th century, when it was abandoned. Today the church is attended by Mr. Stelios, a hermit who lives nearby. It contains frescoes that cover the whole period, from its foundation to the 17th century. Some of the original frescoes are still in existence. They are of great significance because very few such contemporary paintings are to be found anywhere. The Transfiguration and the Raising of Lazarus are combined in one expressive composition. In the Transfiguration, St. Peter is pictured kneeling, looking up towards Jesus, while James is raising himself in awe. Jesus is suspended in a mandala, an iconographic method emphasizing the presence of supernatural powers. The triumphal entry into Jerusalem is a composition of equal strength, as a majestic Jesus rides on the white donkey. Other examples of 11th century paintings in the church are the busts of martyrs and prelates that are reminiscent of the famous portraits of Fayum in Egypt. Among other paintings of the 13th century are the Crucifixion and the Anastasis. In the Crucifixion, Jesus is on a heavy cross, with his body and arms gently curved. On the cross above Jesus' head is inscribed the King of Glory. Virgin Mary and two other women look on, grieved but dignified. The good centurion and a second soldier complete the theme. In the depiction of the Anastasis, Jesus is standing at the gates of hell, and he is bending to greet Adam. Another group of paintings can be dated to the middle of the 14th century, and are different in color and iconography from the others. The birth of Jesus is a picturesque scene. Baby Jesus feeds at his mother's breast, adding a realistic touch to the composition. The three magi are offering their gifts. A young shepherd is playing a bagpipe, while another plays a reed pipe, two goats standing just above. Saints Theodore and George look impressive in their military uniforms. They are dressed identically, but in different colors. In a pine-clad area at the foothills of Troodos, we find what is perhaps the most well-known Byzantine church in Cyprus. It is the Church of the Virgin Mary of Asinu. The church dates from the beginning of the 12th century, and its interior is completely painted in the Byzantine manner. The paintings are of various dates from the early 12th century onwards. Over the south entrance of the nave, there is a very interesting painting of the donor with an accompanying inscription recording the erection of the church. Having been blessed in life with many things, of which thou, O Virgin, was seen to be the provider, I, Nikephoros Magistros, a pitiful suppliant, erected this church with longing, in return for which I pray that I may find thee my patron, in the terrible day of judgment. The donor is painted presenting a model of the church to Christ, with the Virgin Mary as intercessor. The name Magistros shows that the donor must have been a kind of magistrate or tax official. The whole composition is reminiscent of the etiquette of the Byzantine court. The rich clothing of Nikephoros gives us an idea of what a high court official of those days should wear. Of the original decoration of the church, about 2/3 survive today. In the communion of the apostles, in the center of the apse, a young John approaches the golden chalice first. This is interesting, for in most representations of the theme, his place is taken by Paul, and John is moved into the background. Jesus stares eloquently at the departing Judas, on the extreme right. The elegant figures of the apostles, with their differentiated postures, reflect the classicizing style of painting at this time. Moving to the west bay of the nave, we face the Dormition of the Virgin Mary above the west door. This is one of the finest representations of the theme in mid-Byzantine period. The theme appears in Byzantine art after the 9th century. Above the rigid body of the Virgin Mary, lying in bed, stands Jesus, holding the soul of his mother in his hands as a swaddled baby. His face shows no emotion, in contrast to the other mourners. St. Paul weeps by the Virgin's feet, while St. John bends over the body in grief, lifting the end of his tunic to his eyes. The rest of the apostles are grouped at either end. In the Last Supper, the feast is taking place around a semicircular table. In the middle of the table, there is a bowl with a large fish, the early Christian symbol of Jesus. He extends his right hand in blessing, with a severe expression on his face. At the same time, Judas extends his hand across the table. His face is depicted in profile, to stress his weak character and harsh features, a characteristic of Byzantine art. The picture is probably conceived at the moment when Jesus announces that one of them is about to betray him, therefore the agitation in the postures and expressions of the apostles. In the raising of Lazarus, Jesus looks determined as he commands Lazarus to come forth. The rich death mantle of Lazarus reflects the influence of the customs of the upper classes of Byzantium on the art of the time. The northwest recess is filled with the painting of the 40 martyrs of Sebaste. A group of men with pained expressions and wounds on their bodies are in a frozen pond. A young martyr has fainted and he is supported by 2 others. These were soldiers in Sebaste in Lesser Armenia, who were martyred in this way in early Christian times. Above their heads we see their crowns descending from heaven. The 40 martyrs were the patron saints of the upper classes of the imperial forces. They represent the spirit of comradeship in the face of danger. This series of paintings reflect the most sophisticated style of Byzantine art of the Komnenian period. The central section of the nave is covered with a series of paintings which show a different style. They fall within the 14th to 15th century revival. The life of Christ is depicted with 8 scenes covering the vault. These paintings were cleaned and preserved by the Dumbarton Oaks Center for Byzantine Studies of Harvard University in cooperation with the Department of Antiquities of Cyprus. For the need regarding the setting up of a special research center for Byzantine studies for the maintenance and restoration of these treasures, we spoke to Mr. Andreas Stylianou, a respected expert on Byzantine art and author of the book The Painted Churches of Cyprus.
The church and the state are co-responsible for the restoration of these monuments. In the past, the Dumbarton Oaks Center for Byzantine Studies and the Archaeological Service of Greece gave us a helping hand towards the restoration and conservation of some of our more important wall paintings and portable icons. Our Department of Antiquities, with the collaboration of the Church and with important financial contributions by private donors and organizations such as the A.G. Leventis Foundation and the George and Thelma Paraskevaitis Foundation, managed to restore and preserve many Byzantine monuments. But there's much more awaiting to be done. Works of art need constant attention. We believe that we are in great need of our own Center for Byzantine Studies and Research, with modern laboratories equipped with up-to-date facilities for the preservation of our portable works of art. We also need more scientists and many more fully trained and dedicated restorers, ready to go out into the country and restore and record the numberless churches and their wall paintings, the thousands of portable icons, the hundreds of painted and wood-carved church screens, all of which need attention now. We have already lost too much of our Byzantine heritage.
A few miles west from Asinu, in the mountainous village of Kalopanaiotis, we find the disused monastery of St. John Lambadistis. Once again, we cannot overstress the importance of this Byzantine monument. The church of the monastery is made up of 3 chapels built in different centuries. The 11th century chapel is dedicated to St. Heraclidius, and it is painted in the Byzantine manner of the Paleologan period. The frescoes are of the greatest significance and are unique in individual character. The New Testament unfolds in over 30 scenes, with the emphasis on the Passion of the Lord. The betrayal, the denial of Peter, Jesus with Annas and Caiaphas, Jesus before Pilate, the Via Crucis, the crucifixion, the entombment, the anastasis. The skull of St. John Lambadistis, after whose name the whole church is named, is kept in a silver casket, and it is believed to be miraculous. Many people come here to pray and kiss the casket, or to be cured from various illnesses. Sometimes a priest may take the sacred relic to the home of a dying believer. In previous centuries, sick people used to come and lie down in the narthex of the church, waiting for a miracle to happen. Appropriately, the narthex wall was decorated with a series of paintings depicting the miracles of Jesus. An inscription leads us to believe that the painter came from Constantinople after it fell in the hands of the Turks in 1453. In the miraculous draught of the fish, 7 disciples are in a boat, their number conforming with the Gospel. Peter is also shown in the water swimming towards Jesus, who is appearing to his disciples for the 3rd time after his resurrection. In the healing of the paralytic at the pool of Bethesda, Jesus gestures to the sick man, "Rise, take thy bed and walk." The young man walks away. Towards the end of the 15th century, what may have been a Latin chapel was attached to the building and was decorated with a magnificent series of paintings of the Italo-Byzantine school. It is apparent that the artist was trained in the West. The general atmosphere, the landscapes, and the architecture remind us of the art of the Italian Renaissance. The Magi, following the star, is a true Italo-Byzantine masterpiece. In the lunette above the apse is painted the entertainment of the angels. 2 additional scenes, Moses and the vision of the burning bush, and Abraham washing the feet of the 3 angels with the 3-dimensional landscapes, and the Florentine bridge, are comparable to any contemporary Italian paintings. The west wall of the chapel is covered with the tree of Jesse. For another Italo-Byzantine composition of rare beauty, we turn to the church of Panagia Bodithou, which lays just outside the village of Galata. The church, which was built in 1502, belonged to a monastic settlement, but was abandoned in later years. In the sanctuary of the church, there exists one of the most beautiful and elegant paintings to be found on the island. In contrast to the purely Byzantine similar painting at Asinu, the Communion of the Apostles in this church combines successfully the Byzantine manner of painting with Western elements of the art. It is a liturgical interpretation of the Last Supper, with a flow of movement and sober expressions that are reminiscent of the classicizing style of the mid-Byzantine period. The Western Italian influence is apparent in the beautiful figures and faces of the apostles. "Take, eat, this is my body. Drink ye all of it." Judas is portrayed moving away from the communion. He has a slight beard according to Western tradition, while in purely Byzantine paintings we find him portrayed as a youth. Judas is watched by Andrew and Philip. The rest of the apostles on this part of the painting are Luke, Matthew, and Peter, ready to receive Jesus' blessing. In the other half of the composition, Jesus appears with a chalice in his hand, giving the wine to the rest of the apostles. Paul is the first, followed by John, James, Mark, Thomas, and Simon. The most complete series of paintings of the mid-Byzantine period are to be found just outside the village of Lagudera in the church of Panagia Douarakos. An inscription on the panel depicting the holy tile reveals that the church was decorated in 1192. The iconography and technique of the frescoes are of the highest Byzantine art of the Komnenian period. Again, the paintings were maintained and cleaned by the Dumbarton Oaks Institute and the Cypriot Department of Antiquities between 1968 and 1973. The Virgin Mary Arakiotissa, to whom the church is dedicated, is painted in a larger-than-life composition. She is depicted here as a mother who knows the future sacrifice of his son on behalf of mankind. This is the Virgin Mary of Passion, a vision of her destined to become popular in later centuries. Jesus, the ruler of the world, looks down from the dome. His gaze is not that of a fearful God. Instead, he has a serene face of a compassionate God. It is as if he is looking away from man's sins, allowing time to repent. The ascension of Jesus to heaven, on the other hand, is a symmetrical masterpiece. Jesus looks majestic, while his garments remind us of classical Greek sculpture. Moving to the sanctuary of the church, we find a painting portraying Saint Lazarus. It is one of the greatest portraits ever painted in the Byzantine tradition. His solemn, thin face, with sunken cheeks and large eyes staring vaguely, make it a most haunting visual experience. Few people realize that after his resurrection, Lazarus came to Cyprus, where he died 30 years later.
Ο Άγιος Λάζαρος μετά την Ανάστασή του κατέφυγε στην Κύπρο για να αποφύγει τους διωγμούς των Εβραίων και ήρθε στο παλαιό Κίτιο.
After his resurrection, St. Lazarus came to Cyprus to avoid persecution. He came here to Kitium, where he found a deserted temple and hid. According to tradition, he stayed here until the apostles Paul and Barnabas passed through. They met him and they ordained him the first bishop of Kitium. The bishop's throne at Kitium begins with St. Lazarus. He lived here another 30 years and was buried here. The faithful built a small church over his tomb, and it was known as the tomb of St. Lazarus. During the 9th century, when Emperor Leo the Wise wanted all the relics within the Byzantine Empire to be transferred to Constantinople, he also asked for the remains of St. Lazarus. But the inhabitants of Kitium did not accept losing the saint's relics. However, with the emperor's insistence, they gave up part of the remains. The emperor built a church in Constantinople where he rested the relics of the saint. He also built this church here in Larnaca. Of course we are certain of these happenings. This church you see here was built by Emperor Leo the Wise to house the saint's relics in 890 AD.
Not far from the Arakas church, the Church of the Holy Cross of Ayasmati is hidden in the hills about 2 miles away from the village of Platanistasa. It was built far from the village, hidden in the mountains, so that no invader could find it, the old keeper told us. It retains the most complete and finest series of wall paintings of the 15th century on the island. On the upper part of the walls of the nave, the New Testament is told, with a narrative of 30 compositions. One of the most interesting aspects of these paintings are the architectural backgrounds to the compositions. The betrayal of Jesus is a dramatic and colorful composition. Judas is ready to betray Jesus with a kiss, while Peter cuts off Malchus's ear. The mysterious figure of a young, half-naked man with a severed right arm looks on with obvious stress on his face. It is believed that this man is the evangelist John Mark, who apparently was an eyewitness of the betrayal. It is an unusual figure to be included in this theme. The second outstanding feature of the paintings in this church is the cycle of compositions depicting the story of the discovery of the Holy Cross by St. Helen. The theme starts with Constantine's vision. It is said that before his battle with Maxentius near Rome, Constantine saw in the sky 4 stars in the shape of a cross, and the words, "By this conquer." A second painting depicts the victorious entrance of Constantine into Rome. He is painted in the manner Byzantine artists depicted soldier saints. Then there are the 10 miniature paintings of the discovery of the Holy Cross by St. Helen in 326. According to the story, 3 crosses were discovered, and they had to be tested on a dying woman. The cross that saved her was the Holy One. In the last 2 paintings, the holy nails are also discovered, and St. Helen falls to her knees to receive them. This is a theme not often found in Byzantine churches. Perhaps it reveals a measure of desperation felt by the people commissioning the artist and who must have fled the Turkish hordes. Byzantium had fallen to the Ottomans, but Cyprus was in the hands of the Venetians. The painter was looking back to the more glorious days of the fallen Christian Empire. Perhaps he was also making the point that the cross had defeated the non-believers once, and it may be victorious again. A study of the Byzantine frescoes and monuments of Cyprus would never be satisfactory without a visit to the monastery of St. Neophytos near Paphos. St. Neophytos was a Cypriot, born at Lefkara in 1134. When 18 years old, he decided to abandon his plans for marriage and live a monastic life. After 7 years of travel and serving as a novice at the monastery of St. Chrysostom, he further decided to become a hermit. He came here in this secluded spot, where he dug a cave out of the mountain. This he called his enklistra, and it consisted of a cell and a sanctuary. The saint was illiterate, but taught himself to read and write, and wrote his ritual ordinance, a book containing the rules of the monastic community he founded. He also wrote other religious works and an account of the capture of Cyprus by King of England Richard Coeur de Lion in 1191. In 1183, he added a 3rd chamber next to his enklistra by digging an additional cave which was to serve as a nave. In the same year, the saint commissioned the artist Theodore Apsidis to paint the cell and the sanctuary. The paintings are some of the finest examples of the classicizing style of the period. The decoration of the nave was commissioned 13 years later, the paintings belonging to the more severe monastic style. Contrary to Byzantine tradition, St. Neophytos had the artist paint him while he was still alive. We can see him here standing between the 2 archangels. Only about 1% of these magnificent treasures have survived, but even these are under increasing threat today. The Arab invasions and the iconoclasts destroyed almost everything dating from before the 9th century. The Ottoman occupation of Greece, Cyprus, part of the Balkans, and the Middle East from the 15th to the 19th century led to further wide destruction. These beautiful figures from various churches in Cyprus had their eyes scratched out during the centuries of occupation of the island. The Turkish invasion and occupation of the north of Cyprus in 1974 again led to a great deal of the frescoes and other national treasures to be destroyed or removed and auctioned illegally. Even some local people themselves were scratching graffiti in the churches in which they found refuge. Now, in ever greater numbers, the visitors, both from within Cyprus and from abroad, pose a new threat and could accelerate the destruction of the remaining frescoes. These churches have not ceased being primarily houses of God. As such, some of them are rightly used extensively by the faithful. The history and religious art in these ancient institutions belong primarily to the Cypriot people, but they also belong to the world as a whole.
We here in Cyprus take all measures to preserve the paintings, because we believe that these art treasures are the heritage not only of Cypriot people, but of the whole humanity. And this is why some of our churches have been included in the World Heritage List of UNESCO.
Βεβαίως υπάρχουν εκείνοι που κατηγορούν την Ορθόδοξη και γενικώς την Εκκλησία γιατί χρησιμοποίησε.
But we use Jesus' icon as a symbol. It is an icon of Christ on earth as a man.
Εφόσον υπάρχει εντολή ουποιήσεις είδωρων και ούτω καθεξής.
It doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus looked like that.
Την εικόνα του Χριστού ως σύμβολο και υπό την αισθητή του.
We do not have pictures of that period to show us what Jesus looked like.
Όπως παρουσιάστηκε στη γη ως άνθρωπος. Δεν σημαίνει ότι ο Χριστός.
It is only a symbol. It is a humanization of Christ in his material form.
Είναι ένα σύμβολο αυτό της ενανθρώπισης του Χριστού, της ανθρώπινης μορφής του.
Byzantium.